A divorced billionaire heiress. You think I married you for love? I married you to prove that even a waitress can bring a billionaire to his knees. The room fell silent. Crystal glasses froze mid-air. Every gaze turned to her. Isabella Moore, in a simple black dress, standing across from the man who once humiliated her. Moments ago they called her a liar, a fraud, a poor woman pretending to be elite. But the truth was far more terrifying. He wasn't just rich. She wasn't just polished. He was the daughter of the richest man in America. And she was done being silent. New York City, the city of power, pride, and polished secrets. In a quiet corner of Manhattan, just steps away from where billionaires shake hands over billion-dollar deals, a woman in a chef's apron stood over a stove, her hands steady, her gaze distant. The kitchen buzzed with activity, sizzling pans, clinking plates, and voices calling out orders. But Isabella Moore moved through it all like a ghost. To the world, she was a simple cook. No college degree, no resume full of accomplishments. Just a girl who made excellent creme brulee and knew how to season with soul. But what they didn't know was this. The Moore estate, the most powerful dynasty in the United States, had been searching for their daughter for nearly 3 years. They had no idea. She was right here, hiding in plain sight. 3 years ago, Isabella walked away from a world of silk and politics, trading her penthouse key for a tiny studio apartment, and her father's empire for a job in a restaurant kitchen. Why? Because money could buy everything. Except honesty, except love. And she had learned that the hard way. Back then, Carson Kingsley, a charming entrepreneur from a mid-tier firm, had walked into her life like a storm. He wasn't after her name, he didn't even know it. He was after something more dangerous, her trust, and she gave it to him completely. They got married quietly, lived modestly. She used her contacts in secret to get him into rooms most men would kill to be in. She even helped secure him a $1 billion 0-cents deal with the Jacobs Group, one of New York's 4 elite families. But when success came, so did betrayal. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, Isabella stood outside their apartment holding a small cake, only to be handed divorce papers by Carson himself. No explanation, no apology, just a cold, cruel line. You're not enough for the man I'm becoming. It would have destroyed any ordinary woman. But Isabella wasn't ordinary. He was a Moore. And soon the world would remember that name. Just weeks after the divorce, she crossed paths with Ryan Jacobs, the enigmatic CEO of the Jacobs Group, a man who wore power like a well-tailored suit and hid pain behind quiet eyes. Ryan wasn't looking for love, he was looking for an exit. An escape from a toxic arranged engagement to Cara Robin, heiress to another billion-dollar family, a woman he didn't love but was expected to marry for business alignment. So he offered Isabella a proposition. Marry me, 1 year, contract only, $20,000 a month. It should have been just business. But fate had other plans. As their paths intertwined, whispers spread through the elite. Who is this girl? Why does she walk like she owns every room even when dressed like nobody? He wasn't chasing power, but she had it. She wasn't begging for recognition, but it found her. And at a charity banquet held by the Jacobs family, where Carson, Cara, and every socialite in New York had gathered, Isabella stepped, and when she did, the world cracked open. The waiter dropped a silver tray when he saw her. The head of security froze, unsure whether to stop her or salute her. Even Ryan Jacobs, stone-faced, emotionless, right? Because Isabella wasn't wearing her apron. She was wearing the Moore family crest, etched into a brooch older than Wall Street. The same crest worn by Donald Moore, the richest man in the country. The silence in the room was louder than thunder. And then came the words that silenced generations of arrogance. Don't you recognize your future daughter-in-law? From that moment on, everything changed. The battle lines were drawn. Old money vis earned love, family legacy vis free will, betrayal vis loyalty. But at the center of it all stood a woman, once dismissed, now dangerous. Isabella Moore. Heiress. and perhaps the only woman in the room powerful enough to break the system. Section 1. The Anniversary Divorce. The rain that night in New York felt different. It wasn't gentle or romantic. Isabella Moore stood outside apartment 17C, clutching a box in her hands. It was small, humble, and slightly smudged from the rain. Inside was a homemade vanilla cake with fresh raspberries, her husband's favorite. She had baked it that morning at the restaurant, icing it with careful strokes between her lunch shift and dinner prep. The night was supposed to be special. 3 years since she married Carson Kingsley, a man she had once believed would love her, even if the world turned its back on them. 3 years since she had taken his last name, traded pearls for purpose, and whispered vows that she never broke, not once. He knocked. No answer. She tried again, balancing the cake in one hand while adjusting the damp strand of hair that stuck to her cheek. She could hear footsteps inside, and then the door opened. But it wasn't Carson who greeted her. It was Sina, his assistant, a woman Isabella had always found too eager, too polished, and now too present. "Miss Moore," Sina said with a thin smile, stepping aside as if she'd rehearsed this moment. "He's expecting you." Isabella's stomach turned. She stepped into the apartment, her eyes scanning the room. Everything was pristine, cold, and distant. Gone were the framed photos of their early days, the soft throw blanket she had picked up from a flea market he once said smelled like her. Everything looked like it belonged in a catalog now, and none of it felt like home. Carson emerged from the hallway, straightening the cuffs of his designer suit. And he didn't say happy anniversary. He didn't say her name. He said, "We need to talk." Her smile faltered. "I made cake," she said softly, lifting the box. "Remember the first one I made for you? When we couldn't afford butter?" "You remember," he interrupted, his voice sharp. "But this isn't a night for cake." Something cold settled in her chest. She set the box down on the table, her fingers trembling slightly. "Carson, what's going on?" He pulled a folder from his briefcase and placed it on the table. Her name, Isabella Kingsley, was printed neatly across the front. "Divorce papers." He blinked, once, then again. "What is this?" Her voice was quiet, almost too small for the cavernous silence of the room. "It's exactly what it looks like." "No explanation?" she asked, her voice cracking. "After everything I've done for you." Carson sighed, running a hand through his gelled hair. "Isabella, this wasn't supposed to be forever." Her knees weakened, but she didn't fall. "You said you loved me," she whispered. "I did," he said, "but people change. I've changed. And you're still stuck in the past. You hide who you really are. I had to climb on my own while you played humble chef." He stared at him, stunned. "You didn't climb on your own," she said slowly. "You climbed with my help." He flinched. "I introduced you to the Jacobs Group," she continued, her voice rising. "I handed you a $1 billion contract on a silver platter, without revealing who I was. I gave you everything I had without asking for anything back. And now I'm repaying you," he snapped, clean bright. "No scandals. You'll get a settlement." Her tears didn't fall, not yet. Instead, a strange calm settled over her. "He found someone else." He didn't. He nodded slowly. "And that's why you sent Sina to open the door." Carson said nothing. The silence was answer enough. She looked at the papers again, her name staring back at her like it belonged to someone else. "This isn't just about us, is it?" she said. "This is about them. The Jacobs, the Robins, all of them. You think if you get rid of me, they'll take you seriously?" He didn't respond. He didn't have to. For a moment, she let herself imagine what might have been. Waking up beside him tomorrow, laughing over burnt toast, dancing barefoot in their kitchen like they did that first winter. But it was gone now. Whatever had existed between them had been sold, packaged, and traded for power. She looked him in the eye. "You will regret this," he smirked. "I doubt that." He picked up the cake box, the one she had brought with such care, and opened the lid. The vanilla frosting had smudged against the sides during the walk over. He slid it across the table toward him. Happy anniversary, Carson." Then she turned and walked, and she didn't cry until she reached the sidewalk. And even then she wiped the tears quickly, as if ashamed of showing weakness in a city that fed on it. The rain hadn't stopped. It soaked her hair, clung to her dress, chilled her bones. But she didn't stop walking. She walked past the doormen who didn't recognize her, past the boutiques that once offered her champagne while she shopped, past a world she had once belonged to. She kept walking, until she reached her tiny apartment on the east side, until she locked the door and collapsed onto her bed, staring at the ceiling, her fingers still stained with frosting. The next morning a knock came at the door. When she opened it, a tall man in a tailored navy suit stood before her. "Miss Moore?" he asked. He hesitated. "I work for the Jacobs Group," he said, handing her an envelope. "Mr. Ryan Jacobs would like to speak with you." She frowned. "I don't know him." He smiled faintly. "He knows you." Inside the envelope was a contract. 1 year, no strings attached. $20,000 a month. Yet a single line at the bottom. "Let's give them something to talk about." Lesson 2. The proposal that wasn't love. It was a Tuesday, cloudless, deceptively bright. Isabella Moore sat on the edge of a wooden bench in Bryant Park, her fingers tracing the edge of the thick cream-colored envelope she had received the day before. The seal of the Jacobs Group still glimmered faintly under the sun. She had reread the contract 5 times, and yet it still felt like fiction. A 1-year marriage contract. $20,000 per month. No romantic obligation. No intimacy expected. Only appearances. Only performance. At the bottom, a note in ink that didn't match the corporate formality. "Don't worry, I hate this more than you do." A shadow fell over her life. "Miss Moore." She looked up. The man before her was taller than she remembered from the headlines, sharper, like someone who had outgrown soft. Ryan Jacobs. CEO of the Jacobs Group, Wharton Ph.D., Harvard Law, America's youngest billionaire in tech retail merger history, known for outbidding giants, smiling rarely and being notoriously unattached. He wore power like oxygen, effortlessly. "You came," he said, his tone neutral, but his eyes scanning her like a puzzle. "It almost didn't." "I almost hoped you wouldn't," he said honestly. "Would have made my life easier." That made her lips twitch. "Then, because if I don't marry someone by the next quarter, the board will finalize the arranged merger between me and Cara Robin." She knew that name. Cara Robin, the kind of woman society labeled as perfect on paper, heiress to the Robin banking empire, fluent in 3 languages, a walking resume in heels. "And you think I'm your loophole?" He didn't flinch. "I think you're the only woman who wouldn't fall in love with me." She blinked. That wasn't the answer she expected. "I'm not interested in hearts," he added, "only headlocks, optics. I need a wife who understands that this is a performance, a shield, nothing more." She looked down at the envelope. "And why me?" "Because you're invisible," he said. "No ties, no scandals, no socialite baggage. But you're composed, calculated. You know how to walk in heels and hold your tongue." Her pride bristled. "You sound like you've done your homework." "I have," he said unapologetically. "You're a chef, a private person, but you helped Carson secure the Jacobs contract without ever revealing your last name. That intrigued me." She narrowed her eyes. "So you're rewarding me for staying silent?" "I'm hiring you," he corrected, "to be my wife. Temporary." He studied his face. It was hard, sculpted like stone, but beneath that there was something buried deep, a wound trying hard not to bleed. He folded the contract and slipped it back into the envelope. "I don't want your money," she said quietly. "Then what do you?" She thought for a moment, looked him in the eye. "I want to walk into a room full of the people who once humiliated me, and make them regret it." A small, barely there smirk tugged at his lips, the first sign of life she'd seen in him. "You'll need a drink," he said. "The gala's next week." That night Isabella stood in front of the mirror of a private show home in Soho. A floor-length gown of deep emerald hugged her curves, the silk whispering secrets as she moved. Her reflection startled her. She didn't recognize the woman staring back. Gone was the girl with icing-stained fingers and tear-streaked cheeks. In her place stood someone poised, quietly dangerous. Ryan leaned against the doorway behind her, arms crossed. "You clean up well," he said. He didn't respond. She was too busy staring at herself. He stepped forward, eyes meeting hers in the mirror. "Isabella, I don't need you to pretend to be in love with me, but I do need you to look like someone worth betraying a dynasty for." Her voice was steady. "You're not the only one using this marriage, Mr. Jacobs." He didn't ask what she meant. He just nodded. The gala was held at the historic Ashford estate. Chandeliers that cost more than yachts, guests that measured worth in legacy, and laughter that could slice through glass. When Ryan Jacobs entered with Isabella Moore on his arm, the room tilted. Silence bloomed. Every head turned. Garson Kingsley choked on his champagne. Gara Robbins' smile cracked. And Isabella dressed in emerald and dignity. He walked like the ballroom belonged to her. Like she wasn't the woman who'd once been dismissed as a waitress. Like she wasn't the wife who had once been left without a word. He was Mrs. Jacobs now. By name, not by love. But sometimes names carried power deeper than heart. They danced once. He led with precision, she followed with grace. And when he leaned close enough for only her to hear, he whispered, "You'll talk for weeks after tonight." She smiled faintly, but her heart ached with something else. If only this were real, she thought. But it wasn't, and it never would be. By midnight, the damage was done. Social media exploded with photos. Old money circles gossiped. Cara stormed out. Carson left, pale-faced and stunned. Ryan, ever the tactician, kept his mask in place. But Isabella? She walked out of the estate that night, feeling like she had reclaimed something no one could take from her again. Her voice. And maybe, just maybe, a little bit of herself. Section 3. The dinner that changed everything. The gala had passed, but its echoes still rippled across New York's upper crust. Whiskeys filled every marble corridor of Manhattan's elite. How did a no-name chef steal the city's most eligible billionaire overnight? But Isabella Moore didn't care about whispers. She was too busy trying to survive her next test. Dinner. It was Sunday, late autumn. The air outside Ryan's family estate was cool, crisp, and so still it felt like even the wind was holding its breath. Isabella stood at the edge of the garden courtyard, staring at the sprawling colonial mansion ahead. Ivy curled along white pillars. Lanterns flickered along the walk. Everything about it screamed legacy, and she felt like an intruder. A Bentley pulled up behind her. Ryan stepped out, crisp, in a charcoal gray suit. "You're early," he said. "You're late," she replied, hugging her coat tighter. He offered his arm. She didn't take it. "I don't need to be escorted like a show pony," she said quietly. He paused, then nodded once. "Fair enough. But you should know my grandmother doesn't suffer pretenders." "I'm not pretending anything," Isabella replied. "I'm just not telling everything." Inside, the long mahogany dining table glittered with silverware. Wine breathed in crystal decanters. A butler in white gloves straightened a folded napkin for the third time. At the head of the table sat Margaret Jacobs, Ryan's grandmother. The elegant, the kind of woman who looked at you and saw 10 generations behind you. To her left, Chris, Ryan's cousin's copula. To her right, Aunt Lillian, who once ran a museum and spoke only in measured tones of veiled judgment. When Isabella entered, all conversation stopped. Ryan's hand brushed the small of her back, a gesture, a signal, a warning. "Everyone," he said calmly, "this is Isabella, my wife." Lillian raised an eyebrow. Chris coughed. Margaret didn't blink. "Have a seat," she said, her tone sharper than the cutlery. The meal began with soup, but the real menu... "So, Isabella," Aunt Lillian began, "what exactly is it you do?" "I'm a chef," Isabella replied, calmly placing her spoon down. At a restaurant?" Chris asked with a smirk, "or like a food truck?" Ryan shot him a glance. I used to run the pastry program at La Roche, Isabella replied evenly. Now I manage several kitchens under my own consulting company. Chris blinked. Margaret sipped her wine. Lillian narrowed her eyes. And your family? Where are they based? Isabella paused. Ryan reached for his glass. They're private, Isabella said. We don't advertise bloodlines. Margaret's voice sliced through the tension. I see. So no pedigree then. Ryan's glass clinked down. Isabella raised her hand gently. It's okay, she's not wrong. I didn't come from a line of bankers or politicians. I came from something rarer. And what's that? Margaret challenged. Isabella held her gaze. Loyalty and hunger. For a moment, silence. Then, Margaret's lips twitched almost imperceptibly. Well, or at least she's honest. The main course arrived. Duck confit, roasted beets, glazed carrots. But nobody was eating. Chris leaned forward, twirling his wine. So be honest. What's it like being Cinderella? Isabella smiled tightly. Cinderella married for love. This is business. Margaret's fork paused mid-air. Ryan diskin. Chris grinned. So you admit it? Not ashamed, Isabella said, her tone steel. At least I'm not pretending this is some love story. Ryan and I both know what this is. Do you? Margaret asked, her voice now deceptively soft. Because I raised Ryan, I know how he hides what matters most. A beat passed, then another. Ryan cleared his throat. Excuse us, he said abruptly, standing and gently pulling Isabella to her feet. They walked through the hallway in silence until they reached the balcony. The moonlight pooled over the marble floor. Why did you say that? Ryan finally asked. What? She said, arms crossed. That this is business, that it's not a love story. Isn't that? She countered. That's what we agreed. He turned away, jaw tightening. Yes, but you didn't have to say it like you hated it. Isabella swallowed. I don't hate you, Ryan, she said, softer now. I hate that this is the only way people like us are allowed to survive. He turned back to her, eyes searching. And never used to. Why did you agree to this? He hesitated. Because someone once told me I'd never be enough. I want to prove them wrong. Ryan stepped closer. The distance between them thinned. Do you want to make them regret it, or do you want to move on? They talk about you. I don't know yet, she whispered. The other moved. Neither dared to. Back inside, dessert was being served. Apple tart, warm and golden. The butler presented each plate with a silver flourish. Isabella returned to the table and sat down as Ryan excused himself for a call. As the last bite of tart was served, Margaret cleared her throat. I'll admit, she said, folding her napkin, I didn't expect to be surprised tonight. Isabella looked up. But you surprised me. Not sure if that's a compliment or a threat, Isabella replied. Margaret smiled. Actually smiled. Boo. Later, as Ryan walked her to the car, he paused beside the open door. You did well tonight, he said. You held your own. You did. He looked down. This may have started as a contract, Isabella. But tonight it felt like something else. He studied. Don't confuse defense with affection, Ryan. I'm just protecting myself. He nodded slowly. Then we're the same. He stepped into the car, the door closing with a soft click. From the window she watched him stand there, hands in his pockets, the mask on his face slipping ever so slightly. And for the first time she wondered, what if this wasn't just about revenge or strategy anymore? What if something real, right in the middle of the lie? The past returns with a ring. The days that followed the Jacobs family dinner passed in a strange blur. There was no defined rhythm to Isabella's new life. One moment she was dressing in couture for appearances beside Ryan, and the next she was alone in her apartment, still organizing her spice rack like the humble chef she used to be. It was a life built on appearances. And yet something real had begun to shift between them. Ryan was still reserved, unreadable in boardrooms and interviews, but behind closed doors he would ask if she'd eaten. He would pause before leaving, as if unsure whether to say goodnight or something deeper. And once, just once, she caught him staring at her like he couldn't remember why this marriage was supposed to be fake. But just as Isabella allowed herself to breathe, the past came knocking. It began with a box. A small velvet box wrapped in brown paper and delivered to her penthouse. There was no name on the return label, just a Manhattan postmark and a short note. "You left this behind. Maybe it still means something." Her heart thudded as she peeled it open. Inside was a cheap plastic ring, faded from a toy machine at a gas station outside Ithaca. The ring Carson had given 3 years ago, before the money, before the betrayal. She had laughed when he gave it to her, calling it the only thing he could afford at the time. But she had worn it every night to bed until the day he handed her divorce papers. He stared at it now as if it had grown teeth. Why now? Why that? That night Ryan came home late. Isabella was on the balcony, the ring sitting on the table beside her wine glass. The city lights flickered behind her like fireflies trapped in steel. He walked out and saw it before she could hide. "Is that his?" he asked quietly. He nodded. He sent it Ryan sat across from her, not close but not distant either. "Why would he do that now?" he asked. Isabella didn't answer immediately. Her fingers curled around the base of the wineglass. "Maybe he's jealous," she said flatly. "Maybe he thought I'd still be broken." Ryan's voice was lower now. "Are you?" He turned to face him, her eyes darker than the wine. He held her gaze, and for a moment neither of them were CEO and contract bride. They were two people, both betrayed by someone they once trusted, both carrying rings that meant more in memory than they ever did in gold. The next day Carson returned. Not as a whisper, not as a rumor. Appeared a person at the front entrance of the Jacobs building. Security tried to keep him out, but Carson raised his voice loud enough to echo off the marble columns. "I'm not here for trouble," he shouted. "I'm here for my wife." When Isabella stepped out of the elevator and saw him, her entire body locked. He looked different, leaner, more desperate, but the arrogance still intact. "Bella," he said, using the name only he ever dared. He flinched. Carson stepped closer. "I made a mistake. I was stupid. I thought success would feel better without you, but I was wrong. Right behind. You should leave," he said coolly. Carson laughed, cold and brittle. "Of course. The great Ryan Jacobs. Do you really think this marriage will last? You don't even know her." Ryan stepped forward. "I know enough to stand between her and a mistake." Carson's eyes narrowed. He looked at Isabella, voice softer now. "You're not like them. You don't belong in their world." "No," she said, "but I don't belong in yours anymore either." Then she reached into her coat pocket and dropped the plastic ring at his feet. "Some things are only beautiful when you're too young to know better." Carson bent to pick it up, but Ryan's hand was already on Isabella's back, gently steering her inside. They left Carson standing in the rain, clutching the memory of a woman he once had and would never have again. But the ring wasn't done haunting her. That night, Isabella opened the drawer beside her bed and found something she had forgotten. A photo. The younger her. Carson beside her, and in the background, it was from a charity gala years ago. She remembered the moment clearly now. Ryan had been speaking to her father that night, but she hadn't been introduced. He looked at the photo again. Ryan was looking at her. Not at his father, not at the camera. It hurt her. He remembered. Had he known who she was, even then? The next morning she confronted him. "Ryan," she asked, holding out the photo, "how long have you known who I was?" He stared at it, his expression unreadable. "A while," he admitted. He stepped back. "Why didn't you say anything?" "Because I needed to see who you were without your name," he said, "and I thought maybe you needed to see it too." Isabella's heart pounded. "All this time you were testing me?" "No," he said, taking a step forward. "I was protecting you. From them. From me." He was trembling now, But not from fear, from something else. "You could have told me," she whispered. "You could have trusted me." Yet he didn't know how. The unthinkable happened. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. But not plastic, not gaudy, not borrowed. It was elegant, understated, a single vintage diamond in a thin platinum band. He held it out. "No contracts, no press, just this," he said. "Marry me, for real this time." Her breath hitched. "Ryan, I know it's fast, I know it's messy, but I'm not asking as the CEO of Jacobs. I'm asking as the man who fell for you, without even realizing it." He stared at him. The fake marriage. The performance. The cold waltz. Her novel. Her voice broke. "Are you sure?" He smiled softly. Isabella Moore. Wabua Kultu. Section 5. The Gala, where everything fell apart. If love had a scent, it was amber and jasmine. That's how the ballroom smelled that night. Soft florals under golden light, clinking glasses and strings playing a Sinatra classic, as Manhattan's elite swirled through the annual Robbins Foundation Gala. For Ryan and Isabella, it was supposed to be their first public appearance as a real couple. No press stunt, no corporate strategy. Just truth. Or at least the closest they could afford in a room full of masks. But truth in this world? It rarely survived the evening. The dress was ivory, sculpted at the waist. The kind of gown that didn't just shimmer, it silenced. When Isabella stepped into the ballroom beside Ryan, conversations hiccuped mid-sentence. Photographers' heads turned. Even Margaret Jacobs, seated beside a senator, paused her wine mid-sip. But it wasn't her elegance that stunned them. It was the fact that she was still there. Still by Ryan's side. Still stooping. Because no one expected her to last. Not the media, not the Robbins, not even half of the Jacobs board. Yet here she was. And that made her dangerous. Ryan leaned in as they descended the marble staircase. "You look like a storm no one can stop." Isabella smiled softly. "You look like you know exactly how much trouble we're about to cause." But neither of them saw the trap waiting below. At the base of the staircase stood Cara Robbins, poised like a queen who'd already won. In a dress blood-red and razor-sharp, she offered a smile that never touched her eyes. "Ryan," she said coolly. "And Isabella." Still pretending. Ryan stiffened. Isabella didn't. "Pretending what?" Isabella asked sweetly. "That he didn't choose me?" Cara tilted her head. "You think that's a choice? Sweetheart, my family owns half the east wing of this hotel. You were a placeholder, a warm-up act. The curtains will close soon enough." But Isabella smiled. "Funny, I thought this was a charity gala, not an audition for insecurity." Gasps. A few stifled laughs. Ryan raised an eyebrow. Cara's eyes darkened. "Enjoy the spotlight while you have it. I hope you're ready for what's coming." Isabella's smile didn't falter, but something cold ran down her spine. Inside the ballroom, Isabella clutched her flute of champagne tighter. Ryan mingled with shareholders, throwing nods to allies, shaking hands with men who had once questioned his sanity for marrying a waitress. But now they looked at Isabella like she was a stock price on the rise. She hated it, every second of it, and that's when she saw him. David Smith, her godfather, her father's oldest friend, and next to him her father's butler. Both of them nodding toward her. David raised a glass in her direction with a knowing smile. She turned to Ryan. Ryan followed her gaze. "Your father sent them." "Worse," she whispered, "they sent themselves." An hour into the evening, the lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stop. The MC smiled. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us. We now invite our highest-tier sponsors to the stage for the traditional toast." Ryan extended his arm to Isabella. But halfway they stepped in their path. Garson, wearing a tux that didn't fit his ambition. "Mind if I steal it for a moment?" he asked Ryan, too casual. Ryan didn't blink. "I do." Carson ignored him, eyes on Isabella. "You look..." "Which is more than I can say for you," she replied. But Carson leaned in and whispered just loud enough for both men to hear. "Still wearing my ring on your soul, huh?" Ryan moved. Carson didn't flinch. The room seemed to lean in, waiting for a fist or a scandal. But Isabella stepped between them. "You're drunk and desperate." "Maybe." Carson smiled. "But you're still pretending that this is real, that Ryan's not just another deal." Ryan's eyes flared. "Watch your mouth." "Why?" Carson sneered. "Afraid I'll say what everyone's already thinking." And then he pulled something from his pocket. A photograph of Isabella and Ryan 10 years ago. The Gala. The first time they ever crossed paths. The moment she didn't remember, but he did. "Strange," Carson said. "You knew her all along. You knew who she was, and yet you lied." Gasps around them. Margaret Jacobs froze mid-sentence across the ballroom. David Smith's face darkened. Cara Robbins smirked like the devil had just delivered her gift. Isabella looked at the photo, at the evidence. "Right. It can explain," he said softly, stepping toward her. "No," she whispered, backing away. "Don't." The lights returned. The music wouldn't wait. But everything inside Isabella had shattered. Though she didn't. She turned and left the ballroom, her heels echoing like gunshots on the marble as she moved through the corridor, heart pounding like betrayal. Ryan chased after her. "Isabella, wait." He turned at the top of the stairs. "Did you know me before the contract? Before Carson? Before everything?" His silence said everything. "You lied to me," she said, voice trembling. "You knew me. You tested me." "I wasn't testing you," Ryan said. I remembered you. That night at your father's charity gala. You wore your hair in a braid and you handed out lemon tarts to staff who didn't eat. I never forgot." He swallowed hard. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I thought I had time," he said, voice breaking. "Time to be the man you deserved before you found out who I really was." Isabella stared at him. The lights behind him, the glitter, the lawn. And then she said the words that cracked them both open. "If that night, the night we met, you hadn't walked away, maybe none of this would have happened." Ryan took a breath, then whispered, "If I hadn't left you that night, maybe I wouldn't have spent 10 years looking for a way to find you again." Silence. A single tear rolled down her cheek. He turned and walked away. This time, he didn't follow. Because sometimes love doesn't need a door slammed shut. Sometimes it ends in the sound of heels disappearing into silence. Section 6. The confession that changed her fate. The night after the gala, New York City didn't sleep, and neither did Isabella. The lights of Manhattan buzzed outside her penthouse windows, but she sat in complete darkness, still in her ivory gown, makeup smudged, barefoot on the marble floor, a glass of wine untouched beside her. The photograph Carson revealed burned through her hands like fire. He couldn't stop staring at it. She had been 17, hair in a braid, helping cater her father's charity banquet after sneaking away from her finishing school. And Raya, he had been there, watching Ismail, not a stranger, a ghost from her past who had waited too long to return. The knock came just after 2 a.m. She didn't move. And then a voice, low, familiar. "Isabel, please open the door. I need to tell you everything." He stood up, slowly. Her fingers hovered over the lock. And then, with a breath held too long, she opened the door. Ryan stood there, hair tousled, tie-loosened, coat soaked from rain. He looked like a man who'd finally realized how much he had to lose. He let him in, but said nothing. He didn't say how, he didn't take off his coat. He just looked at her, as if memorizing the woman he feared would disappear. "You were right," he said softly. "I should have told you everything from the start." He crossed her arms. Her voice was quiet, brittle. "Then why didn't you?" "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that if I reminded you who I was, I'd ruin what we were starting to become." She turned her back to it. But really, I saw you that night, Isabella. When everyone was chasing donations and fake smiles, you were in the kitchen, giving away lemon tartlets to a janitor. Her throat caught. He smiled at me once, he continued, and I couldn't forget it. I thought I'd see you again, but I didn't. So I searched, quietly, through every gala, every event, until I saw you again with Carson, and I knew, he swallowed. I knew if I showed up as myself you'd never believe me. So I waited. I watched. I made excuses to bump into you. At the farmer's market. At the cafe near your apartment. Do you remember the man who helped you pick up your groceries when your bag ripped? Her mouth parted. That was He nodded, ashamed. I tried so many times. But then Carson married you. And I... Silence filled the space between them. Heavy, froggy. He whispered, "You manipulated me into marrying you." "No," he said quickly. "The contract was real. I made the offer before I realized who you were." "Convenient," she snapped. "So you watched me suffer, you knew who I was, and said nothing." "Because I wanted to see if you'd survive," he whispered. "If you were still the girl I saw in that kitchen." Isabella turned sharply. "So, I was an experiment to you?" "No," Ryan said, stepping forward. "You were a miracle, and I didn't think I deserved one." Her eyes glistened now. Tears she refused to let fall. When her voice cracked. "He all did the same thing. That my father, Carson, the Jacobs, the Robins, you all decided who I was supposed to be, and none of you ever asked what I wanted." Ryan's face broke. "Then tell me now, what do you want?" She met his eyes, raw, unfiltered. "I want someone who doesn't fall in love with a version of me. I want someone who chooses me, even if I have nothing. No name, no legacy, no wealth." Ryan moved closer. "Then come with me." "What?" and she asked bitterly. "Another party? Another lie?" He took her hand, gently, like it might shatter. "No. To the place where I first realized I loved you." 10 minutes later she found herself in the back of Ryan's. He didn't tell her where they were going. And she didn't ask. Rain streaked the windows as Manhattan blurred past in gold and gray. When the car stopped, she looked out and gasped. Very hard. Where they had first signed their marriage contract. Where the lie had started. And maybe, where the truth could begin. Inside, the marble halls were quiet. Ryan walked her to the chamber where they had once stood for their rushed. Now it looked different. Candles lit the corridor. A piano played softly in the distance. And in the center stood a small box. She opened it. Inside, a plastic ring. And beneath it, he looked at him. "I asked Carson to send it," Ryan admitted. "I needed you to remember what you once believed love could be, before we both got too clever for our own hearts." She read the letter. Each word felt like a wound healing. "If I hadn't walked away from you that night, maybe none of this would have happened. But maybe, just maybe, it brought us back to the right place." She looked up. And for the first time in weeks she smiled. Not because she forgave him, but because she realized she still loved him. Even when it hurt. Especially when it hurt. Ryan reached into his coat. And this time there was no hesitation. No corporate strategy. No audience. Just two broken people try to write a new ending. "Marry me again," he said, voice thick. "No contracts, no business, no lies. Just us." Isabella took the ring and slid it onto her own finger. "Okay," she whispered. "Let's begin again." But as their hands touched and the clock struck midnight, neither of them saw the figure watching from the hallway. Carrot Robbins, phone in hand, recording everything, and behind her, a man in shadows, watching. Because in this world of diamonds and deception, not all love stories survive the truth. Session 7. The video that went viral overnight. Morning in New York was never quiet. But that Monday, Phones buzzed. Screens flashed. And across every device in every upper-crust living room from Fifth Avenue to the Hamptons, one headline dominated the city like a tidal wave. Billionaire CEO secretly married heiress under fake identity. Watch the emotional confession. And below it, a video. Rainy, but clear. Ryan Jacobs standing in the flickering candlelight of City Hall, holding Isabella's hand and confessing his secrets in full. I remembered you, that night at your father's charity gala. I never forgot. I needed to see who you were without your no. Marry me again, no contracts, no business, no lies. Just us. And finally, Isabella's tearful okay. By 10 a.m. the video had 42 million views. By noon, Ryan Jacobs' office line he'd crushed. By evening, every board member of Jacobs' group was demanding a closed-door emergency meeting. And by nightfall, Cara Robbins was trending. Not because she posted the video. She hadn't needed to. She only had to leak it to a gossip blog and let the wildfire catch. But because she'd also given a statement. The truth always finds the light, and not all women will let deception slide just because there's a diamond at the end of it. Devastating. Meanwhile, he was drowning in chaos. She sat in the corner of her restaurant kitchen, her apron stained with balsamic and flour as her sous chef waved his phone in disbelief. Boss, you're literally on every news app in the country. He didn't respond. Not to him, not to the flood of texts from old school friends, not to the Wall Street Journal journalist camped outside her building, not even to her father's message. We'll talk soon. He just sat there staring at her phone. Watching the video again. Not for the confession, but for the look in Ryan's eyes. That moment, just before she said yes, when he looked at her like a man begging for a second life. And she knew. That part had been real. But public love has a price. And the vultures had begun to circle. That afternoon, the Jacobs board met in a private conference suite overlooking the Hudson. 11 men in navy suits, all of them pale with anger. Margaret Jacobs stood at the head. This isn't just about scandal, she said coldly. This is about trust. He deceived shareholders. He engaged in an undisclosed personal contract with a major stakeholder's daughter. He manipulated an heiress, and now the world knows. A junior partner dared to speak. But public sentiment is surprisingly positive. Most of the comments under the video are supportive. Some even say it's the most honest thing they've seen in years. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Sentiment, she hissed, doesn't pay dividends. Meanwhile, Ryan was in a different kind of war zone. His penthouse had become ground zero for media vans, drones, and tabloid reporters disguised as florists. But inside, silence. He hadn't left since the video leaked. He hadn't called Isabella, but he hadn't answered a single board member. He just stood at the window, watching the skyline like it might hold the answers. He opened the door. David smoke. Rain could uninvited. You really blew it this time, David said, storming past. Ryan shut the door. Not apologizing, Ryan replied. David turned. You lied, you manipulated, you weaponized a story of love to cover up your failure to report a conflict of interest. You weaponize it, Ryan said through clenched teeth. I tried to protect her from this, from you. David's eyes went cold. You think the world wants to see a chef marry into one of the 4 richest families in America and not have opinions? Ryan's voice rose. She's not just a chef. She's Isabella Moore, daughter of Donald Moore, heir to the North Group. David blinked and sloppily sat down. You know? Ryan nodded. I knew. I didn't care. I loved her before I knew the name. I loved her after I found out. And I still love her now. Yeah. And in that moment something shifted. Because maybe, just maybe, he believed him. But public chaos doesn't wait for love. By sundown, Isabella's restaurant had received 1,700 reservation requests, but also 93 threats. Some accused her of being a gold digger, Others called her the next Martha Stewart. Some praised her for bringing real emotion into the world of billionaires, and others just wanted blood. At 8:07 p.m. she got a call. It was from Cara Robbins. "I have something to show you," Cara said. "Why would I meet with you?" Isabella asked. "Because you think this is over," Cara replied. "But it's not." Click. An hour later, Isabella arrived at a private gallery in Tribeca. Inside, Cara stood beside a massive portrait of the Robbins family, all cold eyes and stiffer collars. On the table, a legal folder. "This is the prenup your father signed with my family," Cara said, sliding it over, before he disappeared from the spotlight. Isabella's hands shook as she flipped through the pages. There was a clause. If Isabella married without approval from the Moore patriarch, she forfeited her share of the North Group. Everything, going and worth. The one he was relying on to protect them, required a majority stake from the North Group. Isabella looked up. "You leaked the video because you wanted the board to reject him." Heiress. "No, darling, I leaked the video because I want to see if he'll still choose you, without the empire you come with." Isabella left the gallery in a daze. The night squalled. But her heart? It started to fight. Because maybe she hadn't just been running from her past. Maybe she was running toward her real self, the one who didn't need a last name or a billion-dollar empire to stand her ground. He opened his phone. He typed one message. "Ryan, I need to see you. No cameras, no headlines, just us." He replied instantly. "Meet me where it all began. City Hall. Midnight. Again. This time, no candles. No promises. No descriptions. Just running. Waiting in the hall." He turned when she arrived. But Isabella didn't walk to him. He stood 10 feet away. "You're going to lose everything," she said. "Your board, your legacy, your bid, Belenquist." Ryan's reply was simple. "If I lose you, I lose more." He stepped forward. Carefully. "You still want me, even if I'm not Miss Moore anymore?" He shook his head. "I don't want Miss Moore. I want Isabella." Then, without fanfare, he pulled something from his coat. Not a ring. Not a contract. A photo. The one from the charity gala. He had written something on the back. She turned it over. "I loved you before I knew your name. I'll love you long after the world forgets it." Tears slipped down his cheeks. He looked up. And let them talk. Let them film. Let them break the internet again. Because the only story that mattered now was the one they were writing together. Section 8, The Betrayal. From inside the family. The calm didn't last. It never did. Not in a world where love threatened legacy, and loyalty came with a price tag. It had only been 3 days since Ryan and Isabella's quiet midnight vow. 3 days of peace, stolen kisses, and whispered plans to leave the city for a while. But peace is a luxury. And their world didn't allow luxuries, without consequences. The betrayal didn't come from the tabloids. Not from the Robbins. Not even from Cara. It came from within. And it came wearing the most familiar face of all. Chris Jacobs, Ryan's brother. Smiling, charming, always lurking just one step behind the spotlight, content to benefit from Ryan's rise, while quietly resenting every bit of it. On the surface, Chris had stood by his brother at every turn. At the gala, at the press conferences, even at their grandmother's private birthday dinner, where Isabella had gifted priceless wooware and earned their Uncle Greg's respect. But behind the scenes, Craig had been making moves, dangerous ones. It started with a whisper, a quiet conversation overheard by Aaron, the Moore family butler, as he passed through the corridors of the Jacobs estate. "Yes, you're on the phone." "Yes, I'll get the shares. Just make sure the board doesn't reinstate Ryan. Or don't care how, leak more. Stir something, use Cara. use anyone. Arun froze. Every instinct in him screamed, but he said nothing for now. Because secrets, they bloom in silence. Meanwhile, Isabella was preparing a dinner in the Jacobs' country estate, a quiet weekend away before the looming shareholder vote. She diced vegetables with the ease of a woman who once thought the kitchen was her only kingdom. And then she felt it. A chill. A scent. She turned. Chris stood in the doorway, watching her like a stranger. "It smells like home," he said casually. Isabella dried her hands. "If you're looking for Ryan, he's out back." Chris walked in, slow, serpentine. He wasn't looking for Ryan. Her stomach tightened. He stepped closer. "You know, when Ryan brought you home, I thought he was insane. A waitress, a fake marriage, but now..." His eyes scanned her like a "You've done something I didn't think was possible." "What?" she asked carefully. He smirked. He made him weak. He didn't blink, but he leaned in closer. "You think love is enough? You think being Cecilia or Moore or whatever name you choose today will protect you?" She met his eyes, calm, fierce. "I think truth protects me, and it'll destroy you." He chuckled. "I see why he fell for you. Shame he won't see what's coming." Then he walked out, like a match left on the edge of a fuse. That night, the news dropped. A confidential email leak. Subject: concerns over Ryan Jacobs' mental state and reckless behavior. Attached were heavily redacted internal memos. Come real. Some doctored. All designed to raise doubts about Ryan's fitness to lead. Within 2 hours, the board scheduled an emergency vote to suspend Ryan indefinitely. Ryan read the email in silence, and looked up at Isabella. "You used my heart as a weapon," he whispered. The next morning Ryan faced the board. Margaret Jacobs presided, her expression unreadable. "Due to the damaging nature of recent revelations and public mistrust," she began, "this board is forced to act in the interests of the company's long-term stability." Ryan remained silent as they read the motion. To suspend Ryan Jacobs as CEO of Jacobs Group, effective immediately. Interim Christopher Jacobs. Isabella stood at the back of the room, jaw tight, fists clenched. He had seen betrayal before, but never like this. After the vote, Ryan walked out without a word. He didn't yell. He didn't plead. He simply walked until he reached the river, where his father once taught him to skip stones, where he used to believe that silence meant peace. Now it felt like failure. Isabella found him there. He'd gotten He simply sat beside him. And after a long pause, Ryan finally said, "He's been playing me since the beginning." Isabella nodded. "He wants the company." "He can have it," Ryan said bitterly. "I just wanted peace." "No," she said gently. "He doesn't want peace. He wants you gone." That night, back at the estate, Arun approached Isabella in secret. "I heard Chris," he whispered. "He's been planning this for months. And there's more." He handed her a file. Inside, bank transfers. To Kara Robbins, media strategist. To a private investigator. Even to a former Jacobs board member who had resigned 6 weeks ago. Chris had orchestrated every step of Ryan's downfall. And now he was courting investors to sell Jacobs Group to a private equity firm, piece by piece. Isabella stared at the penny and made a decision. The next day she walked into the North Group headquarters, into the office her father had once built. He sat across from the board, all men who had once dismissed. "I have a proposal," she said clearly. He raised eyebrows. "I want to buy 12% of Jacobs Group stock, quietly, through North proxies. I'll match Chris's offers, and when the time comes, we vote." One of them leaned forward. "What?" She met his gaze. "Because I don't care about the boardroom. I care about the man who never stopped choosing me, even when it cost him everything." and as she left the building, wind catching her coat, hair wild, eyes steel, Isabella Moore was no longer a woman surviving in a man's world. He was the storm. And this time, she would write the ending. Betrayal, the woman who took back the throne. A week after the Jacobs board voted Ryan out, the city buzzed with speculation. Was it over? Had love finally lost to legacy? Or was someone fighting in the shadows? They had forgotten one thing. They had forgotten her. The headlines still blared about the fall of Ryan Jacobs. But by now another rumor was starting to stir. The Heiress who may be quietly buying back the board said Isabella didn't grant interview. She didn't post on social media. She didn't make a speech or show up on red carpets. Instead, she played the game they taught her to survive, but on her own terms. He sat across from Donald Moore, her father, for the first time in over a year. He didn't speak at first, just watched. I underestimated you, he said finally. That was my mistake. She stirred her tea. He thought he'd never come back. I thought you wouldn't need to. There was a beep. Then she met his gaze. I need your vote. It'll raise a brow. Your marriage jeopardized our holdings with the Robins and the Kingsleys. Ryan is out. Chris has momentum. Chris also has 3 board members under silent bribery, and an equity deal lined up with a hedge fund that plans to split Jacobs Group into parts. Donald's expression froze. He slid a file across the desk. You taught me to keep records. I did. He looked through it. His hands tightened. You doing this for love? No, Isabella said quietly. I'm doing it for justice. For the man who stood beside me when I was just a waitress, when I was nobody. I'm doing it for the version of me no one ever saw. The next day, Donald Moore made an unannounced appearance at Jacobs Group headquarters. And that's when everything began to shift. Behind closed doors, alliances moved. Roxy shares flicked. Cara Robbins was suddenly on vacation. Chris's equity deal began to rot from the inside. And by Friday after, a rewrote was cold. By the time Ryan arrived, not even sure why he'd been summoned back, the executive floor was buzzing. He was escorted past the press, past board members who now avoided eye contact, and into the glass conference room where it all started. But now, Isabella sat at the head of the table. Ryan, she said softly. He froze, took her in. Black, glossy, crisp silk hair swept up, fodder in his. Not as Miss Moore. Not this Sasuli. But as himself, Isabella, the woman he fell in love with. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. They'll turn this on you. He smiled. I'm not here for permission. And then she turned to the board. This isn't a plea, she said clearly. This is a correction. Christopher Jacobs attempted a hostile dismantling of a legacy company for personal gain. He used insider manipulation, bribery, and media scandal to strip leadership from a man who built this company. If purchased via North proxies and personal trust assets, 12.3% voting shares, effective today. Gasps echoed. One board member sputtered. Donald Moore stood from the court. It's legal, it's binding, and it's earned. Chris stormed into the room seconds later. Eyes wild. Jaw clenched. What the hell is this? He pointed at Isabella. You have no seat here. You're just some washed-up chef with a royal last night. Sit down, Margaret Jacobs snapped. Silence. And then the vote was called. 11 hands went up. 2 abstained. 1 voted no. And just like that, Ryan Jacobs was reinstated as CEO. But it wasn't the title that mattered. It was the look in his eyes when he turned to her. Not shock, not relief, but awe. Like a man who had seen God, and she wore an apron once. After the meeting, Isabella slipped away quietly. She didn't need applause. But Ryan had followed. He caught up with her just as she was waiting for the elevator. You fought for me, he whispered. She turned. No, she said. I fought for us. He smiled, heart in his throat. I don't know how to repay you. He touched his chest. You already did. The night you asked me to marry you, without a contract. Later that even the Jacobs board released a press statement. But the media already had another story. It was once called Just a Cook, Just Rebuild a Corporate Empire. From kitchen to board, the rise of Isabella Moore. But Isabella? She didn't care about any of that. He was already walking down a quiet path in the West Village, where a tiny new sign hung outside a building. The Hearth, by Isabella, her new restaurant, part non-profit, part culinary school for underprivileged girls. Because some thrones aren't made of gold. Some are made of grace. Chrissy Long fired, disgraced, under investigation. He'd gambled everything. And lost. Not because he underestimated Ryan, but because he never truly understood Isabella. That night, in the quiet of their pen, terribly. The risotto was undercooked. The wine didn't pair. But Isabella didn't care. He was smiling too hard. You've ruined saffron, she teased. He shrugged. I'm better with merge. They laughed. And when he knelt beside her chair, pulling a small velvet box from his pocket, he frowned. This wasn't a game anymore. No contract. No secrets. Just love. Marry me. For real. No backup plan, no prenup, no empire. Just a kitchen, a view, and 1,000 burned dinners together. We started him. Got at the ring. And whispered, only if you agree to let me teach you how to make risotto. And so she took back her throne. But not with a crowd. With a spoon. With truth. With fire. With love. Section 10. The wedding they never saw coming. Rain fell gently over Manhattan that morning, soft as forgiveness. It wasn't storming, but the sky went up just a little. A day that would change, and no one saw it coming. The city's elite had spent weeks speculating. After all, when Isabella Moore, once dismissed as a waitress, a contract wife, a nobody, toppled a boardroom, exposed a betrayal, and rebuilt a dynasty, people noticed. But a wedding? There'd been no announcement, no press release, no invitation delivered by gold-embossed courier. Just one quiet detail that slipped through the cracks. A reservation for Mr. and Mrs. Jacobs at a small chapel in the Catskills. Private. Unlistened. No photographers, no drones, no orchestra. Only love. And a vow that had waited too long to be spoken. Hours earlier, in a quiet cottage near, Isabella stood in front of a mirror, barefoot, breathless, wearing a simple satin dress the color of moonlight. No jewels, no veil. Just a tiny plastic ring tucked into the pocket of her gown. The same one Ryan had given her when he was just a stranger with too many secrets and too much heart. He looked into her own, saw every version of herself staring back. The girl who cooked to survive. The woman who fell in love with a lie. The heiress who never needed a throne to rule. And most of all, the one who chose to stay. Down the hole, Ryan was tying a crooked tie. Twice. Open. Want to help with that? David Smith said, leaning on the doorframe, smirking. Ryan rolled his eyes. Don't start. David stepped in, fixed the knot with the ease of a father figure who had finally come around, then paused. She really loves you, huh? Ryan turned serious. No, he said. She sees me. That's rare. David nodded, and left out another word. Because what do you say when you witness something real? Outside the chapel, snow had started to fall. Just a whisper of wind to a curtain of white blossoming. And inside, only 20 chai. No chandeliers. No floral wallet. But just a piano. A quiet aisle. Ryan stood at the front as the doors opened. And then appeared. Isabella walked slowly, holding no bouquet. Early BMW. The one she had written the night after their first fake wedding, a letter she had never sent. He watched her heart shattering open in the best way. As she reached him, she placed the letter in his hand. He didn't wear it. Not yet. Instead, he looked at her, the woman who had every reason to leave, but instead he rewrote the ending. The officiant cleared his throat.
But Ryan raised a hand. "I need to say something first," he said. Isabella blinked. He turned to the guests, a modest collection of unexpected allies. Margaret Jacobs, teary-eyed. Uncle Greg, even Donald Moore, standing stiff but proud. Xavier, Loudon, and two of Isabella's former kitchen apprentices, beaming from the back row. Ryan looked at them all. "Uri, 3 times in my life I thought I understood love," he said. "Once, when I bought power. Again, when I bought silence. And finally, when I tried to buy time. But this woman," he turned to her, "she gave me something I never paid for, something I couldn't earn. She gave me truth. And I promise, from this day forward, I will spend the rest of my life earning that." Tears slipped from Isabella's lashes. She hadn't planned to cry. But this wasn't about plans anymore. The officiant nodded gently. They exchanged rings, real ones this time. But Isabella hesitated, and instead, she reached into her pocket and placed the plastic ring on Ryan's finger first. Gasps echoed. Even Margaret Jacobs chuckled. "This is the one that mattered," Isabella whispered. "The one from when you had nothing." He kissed her hand. "I have everything now." When they were pronounced husband and wife, the chapel didn't erupt in applause. It just exhaled like something the world had been holding finally released. The reception wasn't at a ballroom, and it wasn't televised. It was in the back garden of the Hearth, Isabella's nonprofit kitchen. The staff made homemade cannoli. A group of girls from the youth culinary program performed a violin duet, and Xavier Loudon, world-renowned chef, roasted lamb shoulder over an open fire, while laughing about how he once challenged Isabella and lost. Later that evening, as twilight draped the sky in gold, Isabella and Ryan stepped onto the rooftop terrace. The paparazzi, no staged photos, just them. She handed him the letter. He read it slowly and said, "Dear stranger with tired eyes, I don't know what this fake marriage will become. I don't know what your secrets are. But I hope one day you let someone love you for who you really are, even if that person is me." Okay. He looked up. "I don't deserve you. You never had to," she whispered. "You just had to show up." And he had every time, even when it hurt. As the first dance began, Isabella didn't pick a classical song. She chose an old jazz record from her mother's collection. They danced like no one was watching, because for the first time, across the city, the press scrambled. Where was the wedding that it happened? Was it a PR stunt? A brand? A business deal? But they never found it, because love, real love, doesn't need to trend. Epilogue. 1 year later, a Forbes article lands on a quiet Sunday morning. Isabella Moore drops her cookbook. Billionaire chef who changed everything. She didn't inherit a company, she rebuilt one. She didn't marry into legacy, she created it. And in a world where everyone was watching, she found someone who only saw her.
Love was never a transaction. In a world where power is currency and names are empires, Isabella Moore chose something far more rare. True, she was born into wealth, yes. But it wasn't wealth that made her extraordinary. It was how she walked away from it. How she learned to cook with her hands. To live without a title. To love without knowing if she'd be loved in return. Ryan Jacobs didn't fall in love with a Moore heiress. He fell in love with the woman who stood by him when no one else did. And when everything fell apart, business, bloodlines, betrayal, it wasn't money that held them together. It was a plastic ring. A promise made in silence, a vow not written on paper, but on the heart. Even as the elite fought to control empires, she quietly rebuilt one in her own name. Not to prove she was but to prove she had always been enough. So when the world asked, who is she to take the throne? The answer really sunk. She didn't take the throne, she became it. 1. You can be born with everything and still have to earn love. Isabella had status, money, and legacy, but love didn't come from any of that. It came from choosing to stay, to fight, to trust again, even after heartbreak. 2. The quiet people often carry the loudest truths. Everyone underestimated her, because she didn't scream, she didn't play the game loudly, she let her actions speak, and in the end her silence thundered louder than any scandal. 3. Family isn't just about blood, it's about who protects you when the world turns cold. Ryan was rejected by his own brother. Isabella was mocked by her relatives. But in the end they built a new family, one based on loyalty, not lineage. 4. Forgiveness is power, grace is strength. Isabella didn't seek revenge, she sought restoration. She rose without crushing anyone. 5. Real love doesn't ask for perfection. It shows up again and again in your worst moments. Because the strongest vows are whispered when no one else is listening. If this story moved you, if Isabella's quiet strength, Ryan's redemption, and the idea of love after loss touched your heart, then we invite you to reflect. Have you ever been underestimated? Have you ever loved someone who didn't see your worth until it was almost too late? We drop a comment. What part of Isabella's journey reminded you of yourself? Or simply write, I believe in second chances. Like this video if you believe love isn't about perfection, but presence. Share this story with someone who needs hope, someone starting over, someone healing, someone who deserves more. Subscribe for more powerful stories of grace, redemption, quiet victories. Because here, we don't just tell stories. We tell the ones that heal.